3, 2, 1, boom. Dr. Travis Campbell.
Hi.
Hey, thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, definitely. So we've actually had about a 2-hour podcast. I think we missed some good stuff. So this is Trip Morgan, and we're here at the No Dams Given podcast here on the eve of Christmas Eve. And so happy Friday, everybody.
Happy Friday. Happy Shoaly Friday.
Happy Shoaly Friday. Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah. Nice. Very good.
Excellent.
We're here today with Dr. Travis Campbell, who has a degree in philosophy of religion?
Philosophical theology.
Philosophical theology.
It's called other things, I guess. But.
Yeah. And he also has a book coming out, The Wonderful Decree, Reconciling Sovereign Election and Universal Benevolence. When is that going to hit the shelves?
I'm not sure. We're hoping for the spring of 2019, late spring.
Really eat that microphone so we can...
Spring of 19, late spring.
Yeah.
So if it's not out by May, I would not be happy.
Yeah. So we'd love to have you come back on and we can go back over the book in detail. You were explaining a little bit to me. So
yeah.
Considering your PhD, I assume your book has something to do with religion?
Something.
Yeah. So maybe the brief 90-mile
synopsis.
Overview.
Yeah. The question is, it's really the perennial question that philosophers have always asked. Why do we live in a world that has so much evil and despair if it was created by a good God?
Yeah.
That's the question I'm wrestling with throughout. So.
Not just you.
Yeah, we're all wrestling with that one. But so that's kind of the question I'm wrestling with. Any answer I give, I guess we would get into a lot of... I don't know. We'd go down a lot of rabbit trails. So I'm sure we would.
That's obviously enough material for a whole book.
Probably more than the whole book.
More than a whole book, yeah.
So sounds like a
awesome.
series.
Congratulations for that being finished.
I hope it's as good as my book, Mere Christianity, that y'all apparently have. Apparently they're under the impression that I wrote that, and I will claim that is a product of my pen.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful sequel to Paradise Lost.
Yes. I wrote that too, and I'm taking credit for a lot of things here.
Nice. So, what a great transition into beer and religion. So,
this holy topic.
And the holy topic. So, you're not a beer connoisseur, you described.
No, my wife is actually the beer connoisseur in our family, but I drink whatever
we'll bring her on the podcast.
Yeah, she's probably a better theologian than me, better beer connoisseur. But she when she buys something, I'm always ready to taste whatever she's whatever she's brought home from the store, some new beer, some new wine.
Right. So tell me what you had today and how'd you like it?
I had the Skywater and I loved it. I like Miller High Life. I like some of those light beers, and that was a really great taste for me.
Yeah. So we actually went through the brewery, got a little tour and some education.
Yeah, I learned a lot about how beer is made. I never appreciated it before, so it was nice.
And I'll tell you, it makes it taste better. Understanding, there's a lot that goes the phenomena or the experience of taste has a lot in how you understand what's going on.
First time I made macaroni and cheese, it tasted a lot better than ever before.
That's true. That little packet with the powdery stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's just
it really does it, doesn't it?
That's just because you licked the packet.
Yeah. Well, who doesn't?
I know, exactly. So lots of things I wanted to talk about today. Today's probably... a endeavor into my own likes or a delving down into my own likes. So
he's been excited about this podcast for a while now.
Yeah.
Even before we actually
spoke
got it.
Oh, really?
So, some of my favorite things, just to think about, sit around and ponder, beer, obviously religion, philosophy, and comic books. And so how do all of those things go together? and we're going to spin a yarn today and hit a whole bunch of fairly random subjects and try to make it seem, try to have some cohesion within all of those. I'm going to...
and pray the audience doesn't fall asleep.
And pray the audience doesn't fall asleep. You know, we've got an audience of one, so I know there's at least one guy out there that'll look at it. And actually, I guess I lived it, so which is good enough. So beer and religion, there's lots of material down that rabbit hole. I did a little bit of research. I do like beer, the history of beer and how it has developed within our culture. Several of the key things in my mind, are how, number one, how beer really spread all over the world because it's three really easy ingredients. It's basically water, barley, and any kind of flavoring ingredient, the most common being hops. So hops and barley grow almost anywhere, although as everyone knows, they grow better in certain areas. And the terroir, which is the word that I was looking for earlier, the terroir of the region, will impart certain flavors.
That's a good word.
Yeah, I do like that word.
Can you spell it?
So that gets us into another. You've put me in a class of people now that can't spell, and so I'm actually disenfranchised by the fact that I can't spell. So I think that gives me a certain morality.
I'll always remember the word, though, because I love the Lord of the Rings, and I love when Saruman says "to war."
Yeah, very good.
So I now have a connection there.
That's nice.
What a great reference. So beer spread all over the world. The monks actually brewed beer and preserved beer brewing for a long time in Eastern and Northeastern Europe. A lot of the hops are hundreds, if not thousands, of years old in both Eastern and Western Europe, and the cultivars were promoted by the same monks. Part of the great history of that was that water itself was not safe back in that time, but certainly beer at a low alcohol level was safe, and so safe, potable, medicinally it wouldn't. So even if the water would kill you, you knew that the beer that the monk had would not. So that's.
I guess was it second behind wine?
Second, only because the Italians had promoted how great wine was. He doesn't know what to say to that. Well, no, and that truly is part of the history of it. Wine is travels much better than beer.
You don't need refrigeration.
You don't need refrigeration. That's exactly right. And Roman society had promoted and drank wine. And when they found not Bavarians, but the people to the north who were not as cultured as the people in Rome, then that label has stuck even to today. So that's part of the reason beer is more associated with sort of gruff and not cultured, and wine is more associated with culture. But here at Pretoria Fields Collective, we're trying to change that thought and get people to think more about all of the aspects of beer and everything that goes into it.
My favorite hymn is a beer hall tune. Originally.
You sing it?
Yeah.
Well, it's "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God" by Martin Luther.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, it was a beer hall tune, and he just put the words to this old beer hall tune that they sang.
I didn't know that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
There we go. We learned at least one thing about beer and religion just now.
The first thing that the Puritans did when they landed in Plymouth was to they started making beer. That was the first thing that they put up was a brewery. So.
Thank God for the Puritans.
Thank God for the Puritans. And Guinness, actually, I don't know if you read that article.
Yes, I did. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, so Guinness, the Irish, there was obviously rampant alcoholism among the in this Irish community, and I don't know what his first name was, but Guinness started the brewery to have a low alcohol alternative to the high alcohol drinks that were there. I guess to promote sobriety.
We're going to wean you off a little bit.
That's exactly
It's
right.
like methadone.
It had probably had many more nutrients than what they were drinking. Also, so awesome.
Awesomeness.
Very good. What you got next on your little note sheet there? I want to hear the segue into the.
How do we get
superhero
into
stuff.
the superheroes? Yeah, so we've actually already been talking about this, but my so Marvel movies, I love them. I've been collecting comic books since I was a little kid. In fact, I probably would not have learned to read had I not found comic books at an early age. Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars was probably the first one, and I really got into that with Spider-Man's new suit and Hulk holding up 1,000,000 pounds, and the idea of the Beyonder coming in and taking everybody away and making them fight for their lives on another planet. But the segue was that and my love for comic books, but looking at Marvel Avengers Infinity Wars. And we talked a little bit about the concept of how there's a religious basis in comics, and that the archetypes do show a religious context. And I have this idea, the thought that the Infinity Wars is an archetypal representation of totalitarian dictatorships of the 20th century. And so to set this up a little bit, we look at Thanos really as the archetypal dictator. I think Thanos is not, if you look at his what happened to Thanos, he is not as worried about all of the people that he's trying to save as he is angry at the fact that his planet would not listen to him about what was going wrong with their planet and their use of resources. So I think that's a common thing in totalitarian society, is that they're not as worried about all of the poor people as they are angry at all of the other rich people who are affecting them. That's the first thing. When you look at how the movie opens, it's basically a priest in a pulpit telling everyone that he's just killed how lucky they are were having to die for this. Die at the hands of Thanos, and how they have now been blessed by his beings, that their lives could actually have some sort of meaning. And then you move forward and contrast that with what really is the basis of many of these movies, as Dr. Campbell and I have talked about today, is this look at how group identity and how looking at trying to do things for the benefit or trying to do things for the benefit of the group over the benefit of the individual.
The greater good.
The greater good versus the looking at how it affects each one of those people that he's killed. And so that's at least part of the idea, maybe not developed fully. And go.
I think it's an idea that runs through the whole canon of Marvel movies. I mean, we have that going. I mean, Captain America: Civil War has that. Age of Ultron has that. The Winter Soldier has that. Even going back to the first Captain America movie, where he's in World War II and he's fighting a force that is upholding the collective over against the individual. So it's a theme that's throughout the Marvel canon, not just Infinity War.
And even so you made a great point earlier, looking at how each time so Ultron had been made, and they had done all of these things to try to what the greater good, doing doing these ideas that turned out to backfire. So develop that.
Do-goodism, I think, is a plague in society. Not in the sense that I go next door and I help out my neighbor with, I don't know, their yard or something, but trying to come up with some scheme that's going to make sure the greatest good is accomplished for the greatest number. This is utilitarianism.
Yep.
This is the consequences of what I'm doing is far more important than the principles that I'm using to to accomplish this goal.
Mm-hmm.
And so Secretary of State Ross is
The
looking.
principles are more important than the consequences.
Well, I'm saying that the utilitarian would say that the consequences are more important than the principles, so that the ends justify the means.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Secretary of State Ross looks at the Avengers, and he points out Sokovia and New York and all these cities that have been destroyed through their fighting. And I've always wondered why the writers didn't have a Captain American say, "What about Harlem?" Harlem was a lot of this started with General Ross wanting to resurrect the Super Soldier program, which created chaos, creates the Hulk.
Yep.
And then he wants to manage the Hulk, and so how does he do it? Well, he creates
they create an even bigger monster, aptly named
Abomination.
Yeah.
And so they destroy Harlem, and then Stark wants to control things by creating Ultron, and S.H.I.E.L.D. wants to control things by having these helicarriers going over and eliminating people before they even go to trial. We're going to get rid of the messiness of a trial and due process so that we can go ahead and just have an efficient judgment put on people. We're going to eliminate all these people before they're even tried. And Steve Rogers looks at Nick Fury and says, I thought the punishment came after the crime. You're holding your gun to the head of all these people, and you're calling it security. And what Captain America represents is destroying all that and placing the individual above the collective. So then when we get to Civil War, here's Ross and here's Stark, and they've tried and tried and tried to create a context where they can control things and make sure everybody's safe, and all they've done is created more chaos. And so out of a sense of guilt almost, they want to now punish Captain America, who didn't start this. I mean, you could say he started because he submitted to the Super Soldier program back in World War II, but he gave his life. Mm-hmm. But he didn't start. He didn't start the Abomination program. He didn't start. He didn't create Ultron. He was there to stop it, and so now they're going to punish him and say you got to put a check on your talents, your abilities, for the sake of a greater good, which I think is the ultimate irony. So why they didn't bring that aspect of these characters out in the movie, I'm not really sure. I think it's probably because they wanted to make it like both had really good arguments so that you wouldn't take a side as to who was right, Stark or Steve Rogers. And Chris Evans, he disagrees with Captain America. The actor doesn't agree with Steve. He's actually on the side of Stark in real life, so he had a hard time playing the character at that point.
Interesting.
Because
I've not ever thought that deep into any of the movies.
Some people would think I'm a total
I'm looking at
dork for saying all this.
The tech crew's actually pretty into what you're saying because they're all paying really good attention.
How am I doing? Is this a pretty good analysis?
I think I kind of wish that our buddy Mike Patton was here because he could contribute to the conversation a whole lot better than myself. He a big fan and would enjoy this conversation. I hope he's watching.
Well, there's several different things that I think this leads into a segment into. One is the politics of ideology, putting the group or the collectivist above the individual. Mm-hmm. I think another is looking at how there's such a religious part of the reason that these movies have made, I think, more money than any other movies in the history of movies themselves. And you look those up, but my figures on that. But why people are resonating so much with them is, number one, there's an archetypal representation, meaning there's a representation of an ideal that everyone knows about, wants to see, and is built into your system to a certain degree. And so they've tapped into that, but it's part of a religious substructure. Or in this case, looking at Thanos, it's sort of an anti-religious substructure relating back to what I see as probably the biggest mistakes of the 20th century. And part of what we were talking about was I can't see the writers get her. Like, to me, it's so evident of what they've written, but I don't know that I could see a bunch of the writers from Los Angeles or wherever they're from sitting around and thinking, oh yeah, let's talk about, this is obviously Solzhenitsyn and the Gulag Archipelago, and let's make sure we'll have this guy over here, and let's make sure that they're killing, in this case, trillions of beings. Then not all of them are people, but it's for the collectivist good, not the rationale of the individual.
I don't know. I mean, Vision gives that line. He goes, for the sake of the collective good, you need to stop what you're doing, Steve, and come over to our side. So those words are used there. Ultron says, I love the finality of the whole idea of a meteorite. God just throws a stone at the earth, wipes everything out, and we start over again. And Thanos, of course, carries that same philosophy. Snap my fingers. Everybody's done, and we start over again.
But there's that huge scene where Vision tries to sacrifice itself, and then in the middle of Infinity War, and Steve Rogers says we don't trade lives.
Yeah, there's a beginning. Yes, there's a beginning of the film where Loki says, "You will never be a god," and Steve Rogers the arc ends with Steve Rogers saying, "Oh my God," and then we end with Thanos sitting on his farm. Kind of like the old Cincinnatus, Roman times, the old warrior who goes back to his farm. Washington was kind of portrayed as a Cincinnatus. The warrior has done his job. Now he just goes back to the farm and lives a simple life.
I have this idea around that, and it comes from the comic book version of Infinity War, is that the way that they got around this and the way that they eventually win is they convince Thanos that this was a bad idea.
Yeah,
I mean, so to me, and sorry to break in, but to me, and
no, you're not breaking in.
The next one was Endgame, and so and I have no idea, obviously, how the next movie is going to play out, but in the comic book version, he's trying to woo Death. So and Death is in Thor Ragnarok. His sister is Death, who comes in. Well, in the comic book version, Thanos wants to kill everybody to woo Death, and in the end,
he wins Hela, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Doesn't he? Aren't they an item?
I can't remember if he actually wins.
Yeah, they're an item in the comic books.
In the end, but actually, I think she gets denied, or he denies her, and but anyway, whatever. But my thoughts are.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, there's a lot. It's a soap opera, but they do become an item for a while. But the Thanos is trying to control chaos. The chaos is always at arm's length,
right?
And he's trying to control it, and he can't. There's a series of comic books where the Hulk is his slave. He can't kill the Hulk. Thanos can beat him up, but he can't kill him. So he makes the Hulk his slave, and the slave's portrayed as got a chain around his neck, and Thanos has the chain, and he's sitting on his throne. And this is Thanos trying to reign in chaos. The Hulk represents chaos.
Interesting. Well, but to take it back to the
Sorry,
idea, you're great. That's fine. We to try to look at how it relates back to totalitarianism, I think. And this is something, and I think this is why this is a good segment or segue into what we're going to talk about today. You really have to destroy the idea. Otherwise, the idea becomes an infectious scourge. And so if you can get people, in this case Thanos, to understand that his idea is a bad one, then maybe we can change reality. And I don't know if that's how the next one's going to end, but I think certainly that plays into a lot of the what we're dealing with today when it comes to collectivism versus individuality and individual rights.
Yeah, very good. I don't really know if Endgame ends that way. I will say your son has made fun of me for several weeks now because I promised I would not watch any trailers for any of the upcoming Marvel movies. I wanted to go in there and be fully surprised. And when the Endgame trailer came out, I lasted for 1 hour, and then I watched it. So yeah, I held out for an hour. Economic status in common. We had the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, and the founding documents of our country, and the ideals that were expressed in those is what gave us our unity. And so you could have, and it took a long time, and it was never perfected, but it took a long, the 19th century, we went through a civil war to guarantee this for everybody, and we kept fighting for it even further after that. But the whole point of it was you don't need to judge people on anything other than their expression of these values. And if you don't live in according to these values, we call you a bad person. Mm-hmm. And if I go in some quarters in my society today and I quote Martin Luther King and say, I want to live in a world where the content of your character is more important than the color of your skin, I will be viewed as a racist bigot for saying such a thing. And there are people on the radical left that are thinking this way.
Well, and that's because most people haven't read Martin Luther King.
Yes, but
there's a lot of...
I have a hard time believing that the average American, if they're 18 or older, hasn't heard that speech.
So you bring up the other point, which is the opposite of this politics of ideology, and I think it's certainly of the argument against it, which is this idea that the basis and fundamental moral structure is based within the individual. It's what really, it is a marvelous and it's an incredible ideal established over at least the last 2,000 years. It really established Western society and the structure of our society, and certainly it is what created this experiment called America. And so, but it is the anti argument, and I think it's really, and we talked about this a little bit earlier too. If they'll just take their intellectual argument a little bit farther, they actually end up at the individual. Mm-hmm. Because if you can group people in infinite number of ways. So you really can take and put people in an infinite number of categories: color, race, eye color, sexual orientation, what their likes and dislikes are. But at the end, you get to an infinite number. You actually come back to the individual, and therefore the end logic of their politics is that back at the basis of the individual being the locus of morality and reason once again. And so it's very interesting. It's almost like they either don't want to take their thought experiment to its end part, or it certainly benefits them not to, because of what we have said before about them being able to divide, conquer, and parcel the power out by not doing it.
Yeah, I also think that if you took someone down that road, that logical road where you show that their views are self-defeating, they would accuse you of being a patriarchal bigot. You're a product.
I am a man.
You are a product of the patriarchy and use of logical reasoning. Just as we've had a big discussion in our country over the past couple of months over due process. To what degree should someone be considered guilty or not guilty before they're even tried before a court? And we've always said we want to presume them innocent until they're proven guilty. That was a radical concept in the 17th century when people would in the Middle Ages and up into the 17th century, it was not uncommon for a person to be walking down the street and a representative of the government with armed guards coming up to that person saying, "You're under arrest. You've been tried and convicted Well, I wasn't even at the trial. You've been tried and convicted of this crime. You're under arrest. You have to go to jail. That was a not uncommon thing that happened to people all throughout history.
Yeah, especially in Salem.
Well, there you go.
That was actually in America. That was actually in America.
Yeah, we're going to burn you at the stake.
Yeah.
But so we look at a thing like Salem where they allow spectral evidence to be admitted into a court of law, meaning if you dreamed about a person casting a spell on you, that constituted evidence that they did.
Yeah.
That was actually part of what convicted these individuals accused of witchcraft. Now, we look at that and we laugh. But just saying that a person should be innocent until proven guilty in our culture today is in some quarters looked upon as fascism, when the irony is this exactly the opposite
Right.
of what fascism is. So when in the 17th century, in 1688, when the Glorious Revolution was won, William and Mary come to the throne, and a year later the English people put together a Bill of Rights, and they hammer out things like habeas corpus, which was already in play, but that becomes part of who they are as an English-speaking people. And in England, I shall have the body. I shall not be arrested unless there's probable cause, and I will have a quick and speedy trial. And these ideals were put into our Constitution, 100 years later.
Right.
And we were resting very subtly on the shoulders of these people that hammered hundreds and hundreds of years of fighting for these rights that we are taking for granted.
Sure.
And there are people that are writing them off as a product of the patriarchy. They're biting the hand that is feeding them. And it's actually a very scary thing to think that, as I've said to my students, what did the patriarchy get you? It got you the Renaissance. It got you the Enlightenment. This thing that you're calling the patriarchy, it got you the Reformation. It got you feminism. Because
it got women to
because
vote.
this idea that all people are equal under the law, all people should have due process before they're put in jail. Those kinds of ideas paved the way for, hey, why can't women vote?
Yeah, sure.
So this is a quintessential act of biting the hand that feeds you, as I've said. It's the utmost irrationality. It's scary. It's scary to see this happening. Have you watched Ben Shapiro or Jordan Peterson trying to speak at a college? Have you seen the kinds of things that are going on there?
Yeah, they Shapiro for sure. It's so bizarre. They'll have people like he's in a conference. They'll have people stand up and just they start saying the same thing over and over again. He'll invite them down to speak or to say. I mean, nobody says anything.
Mm-hmm. They yell mantras and they call him a Nazi, and he's Jewish. It's the most bizarre. I guess it's not uneducated. It's robotic. Robotic. Let's call it what it is. It's stupid.
It's
stupid. It's the destruction of common sense. It's the refusal to use this mind that you have acquired, however you've acquired it. I would say God gave it to you. That too is a horrible statement in some quarters, but it's refusing to use the mind that you have to make a judgment about what's going on in the world.
So the collectivist ideology versus the ideology that all morality lies within the individual.
Mm-hmm.
I personally feel that the idea of collectivism is very anti-Christian. It doesn't float well with Christ's teaching. Mm-hmm. If you take it logically, if you look at it from a philosophical point of view, then it doesn't work. It doesn't work well with how I read the Gospels and how I read Christ's teachings. Mm-hmm. From a scholar, am I right or am I way off? Because I've also heard, as we were talking before that, we all, if you're truly Christian, we should walk in the fields running hand to hand and all cultivate together and meet out what we've done as one at the table later. And that sounds a lot like communism.
Yeah.
So help me work that out. And now we're thinking, we might be thinking a little bit out loud. So,
well, I'm of the opinion, I embrace what is called the two kingdoms view of the relationship between church and culture. And by two kingdoms view, I mean that there is the kingdom of the world, and then there's the church, the kingdom of God. And you can belong to one in the sense that you can belong to the kingdom of the world without belonging to the kingdom of God. If you belong to the kingdom of God, you belong to both. And that's why I'm a big believer in the separation of church and state. So when you're talking about my duties as a Christian, I would speak of my duties to the church, my responsibilities before the church, how I'm to serve the collective good. This is a voluntary choice that I've made to join this community. And so there's nobody putting a gun to my head saying, you must go to church. You have to go there and read the Bible and believe it or believe what is being taught there. And so I choose to join this religious organization, and we have a set of ideals that we try to carry out, and there is a kind of collectivism, if you want to call it that, for that. So what's going on in the New Testament is people did they voluntarily gave up their property rights to serve the collective good of the church. But that's a lot different thing than the state taking on the prerogative of forcing a person to give up his property rights to serve the kingdom of the world. When I'm in the kingdom of the world, I have not a whole different set of values, but I have a set of values that are distinct from the values I carry into the church. So, for example, if my neighbor is sinning and my neighbor belongs to my individual church, I might say something to him. But if he's a neighbor and let's say he's not a Christian at all, he doesn't belong to any church, or he goes to a different church, that's not my responsibility, right? Because he's chosen a different path in life, and the Western values that we have, and I think that a lot of this comes out of the Gospels as well, those values dictate to me that I must let him make his own choices about how he's going to live. And so I'm ruggedly individualistic when it comes to my relationships in the kingdom of the world. I'm very collectivistic when it comes to my relationships in the church. And my church, I mean my local church that I belong to. I belong to a specific church, and I don't think it's my place to have any conversations with others about how they're behaving or what they're doing or anything like that outside of that context. I must allow you to live your life. As long as you're not hurting me, I want you to follow your dreams and do whatever you're going to do. And
but even the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, the basis of how we should act is based on the individual and how he would act towards himself. So
yeah, both.
Let me make sure that what I'm doing is the best for both you and me.
Sure. Both kingdoms have values. It's just the same values. The question is how they're applied. Okay?
Yeah.
And in the context of the church, I apply do unto others as you would have them do unto me in a slightly different way, because I am thinking not only about that individual, but how that individual is serving the church. Right. But when I'm talking to my neighbor, I'm thinking about how that individual is maybe affecting culture. And so I do unto him as he would as I would be done by, meaning I don't go to him, I don't knock on his door at 2 a.m. and give him a gospel tract. Out of a concern for him, I don't play my music too loud so that he can't sleep at night. If there's a conflict between us on boundaries between our lands, we try to work it out amicably. Maybe we're not agreed on where my property ends and his begins. And so we work those things out, and I'm just trying to let him live as an individual. And as long as he doesn't interfere with me or bother me, I respect his right. Why? Because I think that this individual living next door to me, I don't care who he is, who she is made in the image of God and therefore has intrinsic value. And it's by virtue of them being made in the intrinsic God, in the image of God, that I value them as an individual that they are. So that's why I allow him to do the things that he's going to do.
So that was Aquinas's thoughts on how we live with non-Christians, right?
Oh, and very, very much so. I mean, he would be upholding. This is how we not only live with non-Christians. This is how we live with interact with non-Christian philosophers. We embrace their attempts even to destroy Christianity, and we should read
because of the God in them.
Because of the image of God in them, and I would say all truth is God's truth. All truth meets at the top. And when a person gives an argument against Christianity, all that really is an opportunity for me to make my faith stronger. And so I should celebrate someone's right to say, write a book that's offensive to Christianity, right? Because we're all trying to get to the truth, and if this book is going to make any contribution to me, I'm going to read it. If he's right, I would like to think that I would end up accepting his conclusions. I don't think he's right, but usually when I read,
I guess my point, there could be some right.
But yeah,
it
I will
have to. The whole doesn't.
Right.
There can be some rights.
Absolutely.
Like I really like a lot of the things Sam Harris says. I don't agree with him, but I think he's a super intelligent guy.
Sure.
As opposed to somebody like Jordan Peterson, who I agree with almost, I would say 95% of what he says. But where Sam Harris goes wrong, I think maybe he just doesn't introspectively see what some of the things, like we've talked about. He wants to accept his morality is there. He embraces and talks about his atheism, but doesn't want to accept that he has accepted the morality of what the culture that he grew up in, which is basically a Judeo-Christian culture, and one of the biggest things that he does, which I guess we have a hard time with, is this idea that we don't have our own self. I can't remember what not self identity, self. We do, our thoughts and actions are not our own; they're all predetermined.
Mm-hmm.
So, if we and he has to eliminate, to a large part, as far as the atheists go, they have to eliminate that to be able to get rid of God, because everything then is predetermined. We don't have our own. We didn't decide on our own actions.
Sure.
And so therefore, moving forward. So this, going back to this idea of these archetypes and the religious substructure that's there, do we recognize it and relate to it because of is it the same? Is it a similar thing that's inside us that we call natural law? Are we seeing those things acted out, and is that why that's why we gravitate to those stories so heavily?
Yeah, I would say, yeah. As a friend of mine once said, who himself was a theologian, he said, "There's only one story." So we can go to the Harry Potter movies, and it was interesting when I first heard about Harry Potter. There were a lot of fundamentalist Christians decrying this story, but if you read the story, Harry Potter is a Christ figure. He has to sacrifice himself. Mm-hmm. He has to take on the sins of Voldemort to sacrifice himself. And in the book itself, he says to Voldemort, "Repent." He gives him a chance to repent and say he's sorry, but since he will not, ultimate judgment has to come upon him. Mm-hmm. And so all these Christian themes are there. One of the best pictures of evil.
We all have some devil inside of us.
Right. And the best picture of evil that I've ever heard or had portrayed for me comes from those books, because every time Voldemort kills someone, he fractures his soul. Mm. And so what is the characteristic of a creature, especially one that is overcome with evil? What is evil? Evil is the fracturing of the soul. It's a lack of wholeness, a lack of being who you are. It's killing the spirit. It's all those things.
That just struck me. Is that similar to was it Dostoevsky wrote the Brothers Karamazov.
Yeah, Karamazov. Yeah.
And talking about, well, that wasn't the one with the murder, is it?
Oh, that's Crime and Punishment.
Crime and Punishment.
Where
So the idea that even if it's a completely amoral being who kills another human being, that person's soul is cracked. Like there's a change that happened.
Sure. Even
looking at all of that, there's something different about him from them forward.
Yeah, the idea is
and that's the idea personified, right?
Yes, you never get away with what you do. You never get away with a crime.
Yeah. There's
no such thing as an innocent crime. I mean, the two, obviously, because the two things are contradictory, but it's more than that. There's never such thing as a crime that you get away with. You never get away with it. And Paul says this in Romans. He says, when the Gentiles who do not have the law of Moses do instinctively the things of the law, they show that they are a law unto themselves. And he's quoting or citing Aristotle. Aristotle says that the cultured and refined man is the one who acts as one who's a law to himself. And so this idea of a natural law was pervasive in the ancient world, that God has so created the world that these natural values are discoverable by the human mind. But they can't be made sense of unless you say, well, there's a natural law, therefore there must be a supernatural lawgiver in which those laws are anchored. And if you at least have to have those two values for a society to work. A sense of value, transcendent value that are objectively true for everybody, and then a transcendent anchor for those values. You don't even have to have a full-blown theism, say Abrahamic theism or Christianity in particular, or even something like deism, which you have in Thomas Jefferson or Franklin or Thomas Paine. The Chinese had a sense of transcendent value. They had a kind of transcendence, but they didn't call it God. But they did say that these values that we're tapping into are anchored in that. And that's why their civilization was able to flourish. And as a Christian, I believe that this is common grace. God gives his grace to everybody so that societies can be built and flourished even if you don't have something like a Bible.
Right. God gave these ideas to all of us. And it's us.
And so the Chinese is proving that he's made in the image of God when he expresses these values on some level. This is why I can be moved by a movie that's made in a Chinese context, even though I've never been to China. I don't know the language.
And see a lot of the same.
Stuff.
I mean, what's crazy is you see a lot of the same ideas, a lot of the same philosophy, a lot of the same, especially when it comes to humanity. And they're struggling. I mean, it drives me crazy. They're struggling with it again. They now have concentration camps again in China. I mean, they're now talking about socialism again.
And Christian churches are being
persecuted. I mean, all we have to do, you talk about China being the second or maybe even the first largest economy in the world. Well, just wait, because they're going to destroy it. It is. I mean, they're going to try communism again, and they're going to destroy it. Either that, or they will, because for whatever reason, it seems like communism wants to malignantly multiply. It's almost like it is, in some words, a cancer. It likes to go out and see everybody in its own image.
Before we offer a critique, I mean, we're kind of getting to the nitty-gritty here as to why we should have these discussions. Why do you think socialism is becoming so faddish among young people here in our culture?
Because I honestly think because they've almost been given everything.
Okay.
And it's just they've got so much, and maybe they want to give. I don't know.
It could come from a good place.
Yeah, I think I honestly don't think it's malicious.
No.
Oh, I disagree with you 100%.
You think that when the millennials are... I'm talking about our young people.
Yeah, maybe even so. And because I think a lot of it is envy. And I think socialism comes from a point of envy in a lot of different ways. I think it goes back to do you like helping poor people, or are you pissed off that you're not rich? And so have I taken everything that God gave me and I've done the best with it? Or I'm really upset that Travis, who really isn't as smart as me and really isn't as...
That's true.
It really isn't as, really isn't as, well educated, but he wrote a book. He wrote a book.
Yeah.
And I've never been able to write a book.
Any moron can write a book.
So I'm really pissed off at him because he was able to write a book. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out and make a whole bunch of rules about making it a lot easier for people to write books. And I'm going to look at Travis and make sure that he didn't write any more books because I don't want him to write any more.
Yeah.
Because I'm upset that I didn't get to write my book.
Wow, that's kind of dark.
I think that's where it comes. Where it comes from, much more than I'd really like to help everybody up underneath me.
Right.
And so I think a lot of revolutions probably start on the shoulders of people who are being oppressed, and they just absolutely don't know what else to do. So what you get is the chaos of let's destroy the system and try to rebuild one. Mm-hmm. Because if I'm not functioning, and it's generally underrepresented males, because males are expendable. Right. And so underrepresented males destroy the system. And that's the way it's been throughout society. Well, if you get to that point, then there's going to be some ideology that takes hold. And is that going to be the ideology of I'll give you what you want? Is that going to be the ideology of let's hate the guy up here? Or is that going to be the ideology of let's you, I, and him control the whole group and become the guy up here? And I listened to it was Solzhenitsyn, and he was talking to anyway, it was somebody who was talking to Lenin, the Lenin who Vladimir Lenin, yeah, and he said he was talking about farmers, and it wasn't a very intellectual conversation. But one of the things that Lenin said was, well, then we'll kill those farmers. Mm-hmm. That was one of the comments. And these were the same farmers who had risen up and put him into power.
Once they serve the use of the collective, they become expendable.
Yeah.
As Stalin says, the death of one man's a tragedy. The death of a million is a statistic.
For necessity in his case.
Yeah. So... But I guess going back to my question, though, in your mind, a lot of these dark thoughts are on the minds of, say, the college student sitting in the dorm room, and they're complaining about things, and they're saying Bernie Sanders has the right diagnosis and the right solution to this problem. You think that in their minds, they're thinking these kind of nefarious, dark thoughts?
I think it's easier. Well, I think it's easy for people to get caught up in those ideals, in the ideals of redistribution, and meaning that we should make sure that the people up top don't have too much. And I don't know how to do it equitably, and I don't think anybody has. I think that's a conversation. But I don't necessarily think that the ideal of redistribution is evil either.
I do. I think it's a bad idea.
But at the same time, I think that it's a very, especially if you're an idealistic young person, that is it's easy to get caught up in.
Sure.
It sounds incredibly moral,
romantic even.
It sounds so good.
It's almost Christian.
Yeah,
and I guess that's what that's part of. That's part of where we had started. That's actually where we started, I think.
Right. The writer Francis Schaeffer called Marxism a Christian heresy, and the reason he did so is because all the themes of giving for the betterment of humankind, giving of yourself. Mm-hmm. Not being so materialistic, all of those things are right there in the communist propaganda. And he says, woe be to those for whom the communists take over, though. Once they take over and have that power,
sure,
they really do a number on you.
Yeah.
And that was the deceptive part. I mean, you had I guarantee you that if we were to pluck out a lot of the 19-year-old college students all along in Eastern Europe and all those satellite countries just before Stalin and the Soviet Union took them over, we were to pluck them out and we were to bring them into our context, assuming they could speak English and all that stuff. But they were to have a conversation with our young people. You would see all the same themes being hit.
Right. Yeah.
They were convinced that communism was the party of the future because it was the party that was going to bring the best out of us and give the most to the most people.
Sure.
And the problem is they have the right diagnosis. The diagnosis is that capitalism is really corporatism. Mm-hmm. Corporations gain monopolies through lobbying congressmen to pass bills in their favor so that the little guy can't come up with a new idea unless he has a gazillion regulations he's got to meet before starting his new business, and so he just gives up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, take Tucker, the guy that built the car in the 1940s that was light years ahead of the big three. They lobbied and lobbied and lobbied and made sure that only 46, I think, were built.
Yeah.
They made sure he didn't get that thing off the ground. Irony being that after millions of deaths, the seat belt that he installed in his car, all the other safety features, better gas mileage, they were all eventually imposed on the big three through regulation when he's proof that the market can actually gain those things for you and probably save more lives.
Sure.
If I'm going to a car salesman and he says, "Look at my car. What is this? This is the Tucker. What is this? This is called a seat belt, and this will strap you in and make sure that you are safe.
That you don't die.
What kind of window? This windshield is
it collapses so that you don't come
so
in.
that you don't. So that you
don't be beheaded.
So you won't be beheaded. Yeah. So you have what is it? This is a third light in front. This is so you can have better night vision. Wow, I want that car. And so that car, the more sold, the cheaper they come, and the more people can buy them. So if you just allowed him to unleash it into the market, well, then Ford and GM, they would have to change their styles and all that stuff. But what happens is we don't live in a capitalist society. We live in a corporatist society in which true freedom in the markets just aren't there.
Right.
And what the diagnosis is spot on. But like Bernie Sanders wants more regulation on businesses, and what do corporations do? They rub their hands together, and they're happy about the regulations because they can meet any fine that might come against somebody for not meeting a regulation.
Sure.
So all the regulations do is prevent more entry into the market.
The small guy.
Yeah. The small guy can't pay a $250 million fine on a refusal to follow regulation. He can't hardly pay a $250,000 fine.
So
a corporation can pay whatever limit you set as to the money, with the consequence of not following that regulation. The corporation can pay that off, with a wave of the hand almost. They can pay that off without breaking a sweat, and then make the taxpayers who are buying their products suffer because they just up the prices.
Yeah. So these hierarchies tend towards corruption and cronyism.
Yes.
And so then we have more regulation to try to promote, better function of the hierarchy.
Sure.
But the less, and so this is what I really like about Peterson, the less likely we are to have. So the key to that is to play more games, to have more entries into these arenas that people can get into. So in other words, it's exactly what you said. Make it easier for, instead of having one or two car makers, to have 25 different car makers.
Sure.
And let them all enter, or have a car maker and a scooter maker, and maybe these people are really good at car makers, and these people are really good at scooter makers.
So more or something is better.
It's actually
so if there were
more games,
if there were more political parties,
then more people can be it. Yeah.
Are you saying it's better?
Yeah, I am. I'm saying it's better.
And obviously we wouldn't want to limit that to cars or anything else. How about health care? How about beer?
How about beer? We like for the small guy to do well in the beer industry.
Yes.
Yeah. Sure.
There's no reason why anybody should put a limit as to what is made or so. Deregulation is. I'm not finishing my sentences here, but deregulation is really the answer. But it also has to be coupled with People want to put a limit. Our upcoming Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, just made a deal where she's going to push for a term limits on the Speaker of the House. Well, that's easy. She's elderly, and she's probably not going to.
Yeah.
She's not.
This is her only term. So.
Yeah, she's not going to be a congressman for much longer, no matter how you slice it. Well, it's easy for her to make that deal.
Sure.
And that will accomplish nothing. Term limits on politicians, limits on the Speaker of the House, Senate Majority Leader, whoever. Those term limits do not accomplish anything. What you need to have term limits on is the bureaucrats that are sitting behind closed doors, writing our laws and having our congressmen rubber stamp it. What you need is term limits on all kinds of regulatory agencies.
Right. All the people who, no matter who gets elected, are still there.
They're still
there. Which people don't even understand most people, a lot of people, don't even understand that exists.
Sure.
That there's all of the functionality of government that's really put forward by people who aren't elected.
Lobbyists who show up and say, I'm going to lobby this congressman and pay him all kinds of campaign fees and all of that stuff so he'll pass a law in my favor. You got to get rid of that. And you also have to get rid of government subsidies of big corporations. What does Walmart need $500 million a year for, if I understand things correctly? Why do they need that much money? I would like that much money.
Because
like half.
Because they're Walmart.
And yeah, and that's not a.
Well, that brings us into a next segue. The idea of the Tower of Babel and Too Big to Fail. I'm just kidding. That wasn't the next segue, but it does get into truth, deeper truth, and science. And so, one of the things that I really that I love about Christ and the Bible and the Gospels is how he spoke in parables. And I don't think I understood it as well as when I first started it as I do now. But tell me your take on interpretation, the idea or the difference between something being true, meaning, and this is I'm a scientist, so don't consider this a heresy because I think I accept almost all of the Judeo-Christian ethic.
Sure.
But I don't think the world was made in 7 days. Okay, so let's say that's the one part I don't necessarily like. And so, but I can see a truth that's there that's deeper than their cosmological theory. Mm-hmm. And so truth then, and by that I mean a deeper truth as God spoke the world into being, and this idea of speaking things and the spoken truth and how things become real once we name them, and understanding sort of the psychological truth or the truth behind the meaning of the words. And so and we see that a lot in mathematics. I mean, I think the truth of mathematics can be even higher than what the actual numbers are. And so maybe you can take away my heresy, but speak to the truth, the true truth, and then science, and how we should look at that in the context of the Bible.
I follow the Belgic Confession, which says that God has given us two books, the book of nature and the book of Scripture. And because they come from one author, they're always going to be in harmony. And I don't believe that the universe was created in 6 consecutive 24-hour days either. But it's not because I've looked at science. I'm not a scientist. So it's not because I've looked at what the scientific record is showing or what scientists are telling me, and they say, the universe is on the order of 14 billion years. Our planet is 4.5 billion years, and therefore I'm running back to the Bible to reinterpret it to make it fit that. That's not what I'm doing. I look at a scientist who tells me this, and I have a discussion about that, and I'm convinced that that's what the scientific evidence is showing on the orders of magnitude of, in terms of certainty, just like 99.9%. Mm-hmm. Okay. We're as sure of that as we are of almost anything in science, right, that our universe is about the age that the astronomers are saying it is, and so on. Well, let's say I've been reading my Bible for years, and I've just always interpreted the days as being 6 consecutive 24-hour days. Well, that scientist has convinced me that I need to go back and look at the Bible again. And not only the Bible, but look at the Christian tradition and see what other theologians have said. The majority view has been that the universe was created in 6 consecutive 24-hour days, but it's not the only view.
Right.
And so really what you're looking at is competing interpretations, and the question is which one is right. And it turns out that the minority of really excellent theologians, people like Augustine, people like Aquinas, who did not interpret the text as teaching 6 consecutive 24-hour day creationism, that they're actually right. And that many other excellent theologians that read the Bible that way are wrong. And you can actually look at clues in the text to show that really these days were never meant to convey a 24-hour time period. Take, for example, the seventh day. I don't know if last time you've read Genesis 1, but when you're reading it, you'll notice that when you're reading through the creation week, each day ends with a number and also what we call the evening morning formula. So it'll say, and there was evening and there was morning, day 1. There was evening and there was morning, a second day, evening and morning, on. And then we get to the seventh day. And when you get to the seventh day, there's no evening and morning. The day is not closed out. What does that mean? Well, Hebrews 4 suggests that we're in that day. So we're in the seventh day right now as we speak. Now, take the sixth day of creation. I believe that Genesis 2 is what we call a recapitulation of the sixth day of creation. On the sixth day of creation, at the very end of that day, humankind was created. And then what happens is you see the end, the creation week is finished, and then what we do is we go back and look at more details of what happened on the sixth day. And what happened on the sixth day? Adam is made, he's created, and then after Adam is created, we make a garden. Well, how long does it take a tree to grow? It takes a while.
He's having a hard time with the question.
It takes a while, doesn't it? It takes a little bit longer than 24 hours.
It does.
And then, now unless you're willing to say that kind of like a time-lapse film in Disney where everything pops up.
Sure.
Unless you're willing to do that. But notice what the text says also. It says there was no plant because there was no water on the ground. In other words, we're learning that God is allowing natural explanations to be natural causes of events. So plants don't grow when there's no water on the ground. So we're not talking about a miraculous creation of a tree just de novo, just sort of sitting there on the ground. We're talking about plants naturally growing through the use of water and sunshine, what every Hebrew would agree with. Right. So there's everything indication in the text that we're not talking about a kind of reverse time-lapse film where things popping out. Notice also that Adam's given a charge to till and work the garden. And then he goes and names all the animals. He names all the animals on day 6.
Right.
And I actually wrote an essay for a group called Reasons to Believe on this, and it's called The Argument from the Sixth Day, where I interact with young earth creationists who believe that the universe is 6,000 years old. And they're trying to say, well, Adam named these animals very quickly, almost like a pet parade where they line up and he just goes, aardvark, dog, cat, and the way the text reads, rather, is Adam goes and names them. And for the Hebrew mindset, when you name something, it meant something. The name they took 8 days to name a child. On the 8th day, you're named and you're circumcised if you're male. Names meant something. Names reflected your character. Now, I'm not saying Adam waited 8 days before he named an animal, but surely he took time to sit and interact with the animal and give it its name. Right. To reflect the character of the animal. So just the naming part, even if we're talking just 1,000 animals, that's going to take well over 24 hours to name all those animals. And there are conservatives who believe that it was at least 10,000 animals that he must have named.
Right.
So those two considerations alone give us a creation week that is far longer than 24-hour day periods. These are eons. Each day represents an eon of creation, where God is bringing new species into existence. He's creating a habitable place for humanity to come, and He's doing that kind of process. He's engaged in that sort of work. So I have no problem reconciling the time limits set in science with the time limits suggested in the Bible.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of this idea of God of the gaps, which they had talked about, or Daniel, I messed up his name earlier, Craig.
William Lane Craig.
William Lane Craig.
Mm-hmm.
And really we don't, and I hate the idea of God of the gaps, because I think all it is science we as trying to continue to learn things will constantly figure out why as far as the material world, the observed world, how it can be looked at, and we'll explain how those material things work. I think the conceptual parts of it are much conceptual, meaning the God the whys are much harder than the whats
And the hows.
and to figure out. So I guess my point was, and you answered it wonderfully, is it's okay to interpret these things. It's okay to have and I guess modern interpretation is not that, but it's okay as science moves forward.
It should interest everybody listening to this that the earliest Christian commentary on the seventh day of creation is found in the Epistle of Barnabas. And the Epistle of Barnabas takes this to be a long period of time.
Ah.
So again, this is not running away from science and saying, oh, science has discovered this, so let me just conjure up an interpretation out of nowhere. This is me going to the text, looking at its content. Science has influenced me to give the text a second look. There's no doubt about that. In the same way that in the 16th century, there was a serious debate as to whether the earth was the center of the universe or not. And there were theologians who were saying, when Joshua calls the sun to stand still, he's clearly causing the sun to stop its course going through the sky. Well, we've learned that there are other texts in Scripture that would suggest that there's more going on in our universe than that, and so we no longer think that Joshua literally commanded the sun to stand still.
Yeah.
In other words, what Copernicus discovered forced us, Copernicus, who was a committed Christian,
Right.
forced us to give the text a second look. And there are plenty of traditions, both Jewish and Christian, which interpreted the days this way, which interpreted the phenomena this way. So we're basically just opting for one tradition of interpretation over another. So I don't consider it a modern interpretation. I consider it a interpretation, minority to be sure, from the Christian tradition that I'm just adopting because it's been vindicated through an investigation of the scientific record.
All right, so that was awesome. Appreciate the everything today. We've been going a little more than an hour, so need to call it a day. This has probably been one of the funnest podcasts I've done. Some of my favorite topics. I'd love to have you back on. Hopefully, it won't be as long as. Well, hopefully, your book will be out quick.
Yeah,
and then we can get you back on, and we can talk about your book and some of these other subjects. But Merry Christmas.
Hey, Merry Christmas to y'all.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah, thank you for doing it. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah, enjoyed it.